Dozens of medical students, residents, and even some attendings reach out to me every year asking for guidance on whether or not they should quit medicine. In this video, I obviously can't tell you whether you should or shouldn't, but we're gonna cover a framework to empower yourself to make the best decision for you. Let me start by saying you are definitely not alone. Quitting clinical medicine has been a thing for as long as clinical medicine has been a thing, but it just doesn't get much visibility or publicity. I think the reason I'm getting so many messages in particular is simply because I was one of the first people to be so public and open about it here on YouTube. And with that out of the way, here are the 5 steps to help you decide whether or not to quit. Step 1 is a health assessment. It's dark, and unfortunately, we don't talk about this enough, but there is an epidemic of depression and suicide amongst medical students and residents. If you're considering quitting because of your mental or physical health, remember that health is the #1 priority. A healthy person wants 1,000 things, a sick person just wants 1. Don't downplay the importance of your mental and physical health. If this is the primary driver of you considering quitting, the first step would be to do whatever it takes to stabilize yourself. Are you able to take time off to get therapy and focus on your well-being? Are you able to hone your time management techniques to feel less overwhelmed and have more time for sleep? This is the time to rely on your support systems. We're talking about friends and family, and also reaching out to both mental and physical health professionals. This is obviously condensed and simplified, but you get the idea. Step 2 is to be deliberate and seek clarity with the reasons that are pushing you to make this decision. And keep in mind that this may overlap with step 1 for some people. Identifying your reason or reasons is critical because for many of us, this is a decision that you cannot reverse. If you're a PGY3 and you're walking away from a neurosurgery residency, you're never gonna become a neurosurgeon because no program is gonna take you back after that. Granted, this is gonna depend on a multitude of factors, your specialty of course, your specific program, the reason for you leaving, and the list goes on. But you may have higher chances of re-entering a residency program if you were leaving family medicine, let's say. Now, journaling, speaking with friends, family, and mentors, these are great places to start here. Are you burned out by medicine? Is medicine not what you expected? Is the lifestyle too challenging? And maybe now your priorities have changed since you're a bit older. Do you have other exciting opportunities that are tugging at you? Are you curious to experience other career paths? This step is particularly important because your answer here will determine your options in the subsequent steps. Now keep in mind, the majority of those who are deliberating on whether or not to quit, they actually decide to continue on with medicine and find that this deliberation on quitting clinical medicine is just a phase during a series of tough rotations, or during a challenging transition, or when there are issues in their personal life that reduce their resilience at work. So now, based on your reason, is this something that you can fix? If the lifestyle is too challenging, is it just a temporary thing with a few tough rotations back to back? If not, are you able to hone your own time management techniques to make it a little bit more manageable? Can you perhaps switch to a completely different specialty with a better lifestyle? And if you're already in attending, can you reduce your hours? Let's say you're curious about other career paths. Can you do some interning or other lighter part-time experiences on the side to dip in your toes before making that decision that's, again, gonna be difficult to reverse? This is also the time to be very, very careful with survivorship bias. I know a few people who quit who regret their decision because the other side, quitting clinical medicine, was glorified in their minds. I knew a guy who developed severe tension headaches during MCAT studying in college, and it continued on, such that ultimately in the middle of medical school, he quit. Now, I don't know all the details, and maybe this was the only thing left for him to do, and if so, good on him for prioritizing his health. I'm not sure if he tried every tool at his disposal. I know he saw a physical therapist to reduce tension in his neck while in college, but did he also try meditation, stress relief techniques, massage, mobility work, acupuncture, medication, and so on? Did he first try taking time off from school to focus on his health prior to making his decision to quit? Or did he make up his mind without doing so? Now, I raise these questions not to judge what he did, but to draw a light on the fact that if you have a clear problem that's pushing you away from clinical medicine, you should do everything reasonable to try to solve it. Getting into medical school was incredibly challenging, and it's not something that you want to walk away from until that problem, if it is a single main problem, until that problem is thoroughly assessed and vetted. Before we get to step 3, a quick word about our sponsor, 8 Sleep. 8 Sleep's Pod is a mattress cover that allows you to automatically warm and cool each side of your bed to improve your sleep quality. It's common for physicians and physicians in training to burn both ends of the candle and push themselves beyond what many consider reasonable, and getting highly restorative sleep is a game changer in achieving our peak performance. We must cool our bodies by 1 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit to enter deeper and more restorative stages of sleep, and we must warm our bodies upon waking. This is part of the circadian rhythm, and it's coded into our biology. By automatically modulating the temperature of my bed at 4 points, first falling asleep, then early sleep, late sleep, and finally waking up, I found that with the pod, I can get higher quality sleep and stay asleep with fewer mid-sleep awakenings. Before, I occasionally had issues where I would be too hot while trying to fall asleep, and then too cold in the middle of the night a few hours before waking up. I've been using the 8 Sleep Pod for the last 2 months now, and I'm no longer waking up due to feeling too cold, and I find it much easier to fall asleep too, rather than tossing and turning feeling too hot. We often focus on the number of hours of sleep, the quantity, but the quality of our sleep is often overlooked. And for busy medical students and doctors who are often unable to secure the recommended 7 to 9 hours of sleep each night, tools like 8 Sleep help make the most of the limited time in bed we have by improving our sleep quality and the restorative nature of that sleep. It goes on your bed like a fitted sheet, and it's easy to use with their app. You can even give your partner access so they can control their own side, and there's a built-in vibration feature to help wake you up gently and without a piercing alarm sound or disturbing your partner. For a limited time, visit 8sleep.com and use code Kevin for $200 off the pod cover. Step 3 is to weigh your training stage. Now, people quit at all stages, from pre-med to medical student to resident, and yes, even attending. If you quit as a pre-med, congrats. This is obviously the cleanest time to do so, and you got no financial obligation, no sunk cost fallacy, etc., etc. And you're also joining most of the pre-meds. There's nothing wrong with that. At UCLA, when I first started orientation, there were over 2,000 pre-meds in the entering class. At graduation, only a little over 200 had applied to medical school, and sure, maybe another 100 or 2 would apply later after graduating. I had many friends who were pre-med early in college and then changed their mind within a year or 2. And you know what? It's no big deal. In fact, this is the perfect time for you to be incredibly deliberate in understanding the medical training path, what it entails, and what type of commitment it will require of you. It's absolutely not the path for everyone, as I've said time and time again. And if you decide to pursue something else, congratulations on figuring it out now and not later once that sunk cost fallacy is much more potent. If you're at this stage of being a pre-med, one of the most important things you can do is really understand what it is to be a doctor, the whole training process, and what it's also like to be an attending, to decide if it's right for you. And I recommend reading Dr. Amit Pandey's The Pre-Med Paradox. We actually did a book summary on the Med School Insider's YouTube channel, and also did a rooftop fireside chat on this channel covering many of these topics. Start there and buy his book if you'd like to dive in deeper. Now, if you're already in medical school, I usually advise students against quitting and suggest finishing to graduate with their MD. Going to medical school and quitting in the middle leaves you comparatively empty-handed, apart from your skills and experiences, which of course can be somewhat valuable depending on your ultimate trajectory, but may also be mostly useless for other trajectories. But graduating with your MD and then leaving clinical medicine opens up more doors and opportunities for you. This is a simplification, of course, and obviously it still depends. There's a big difference between quitting as an MS1 versus quitting as an MS4. Now, if you know with absolute certainty that you don't want to do residency, remember that you just have to pass, and you don't need to hold yourself up to a very high standard to crush your rotations and crush the boards and set the curve, right? As they say, P equals MD, pass equals your medical degree. Now, that being said, I do believe that there is tremendous value in applying yourself to the best of your ability and trying really hard, because not only will it help you build that true self-confidence by seeing that you're capable of achieving way more than you thought possible, but you also build work ethic and the skill set of grinding hard and pushing through uncomfortable emotions and time management and focus and how to learn things faster. These are skills that translate to just about any future direction you may choose. If you never challenge your assumptions and stick with what's comfortable, you'll do a grave disservice to your own growth trajectory. There may be additional benefits too that are harder to predict looking forward, but may be easy to connect looking back. As an example, I wouldn't be on this path if I hadn't tried hard in college and medical school and left it all on the proverbial court. First, I wouldn't have been able to get all of my tuition and most of my living expenses covered. The only reason I was able to secure that one scholarship they gave out per year is because I scored on the 100th percentile on the MCAT, had a near perfect GPA, and worked hard to create a compelling story. Having only $30K in loans between college and medical school to pay off by the time I was willing to quit was way more realistic and far less intimidating than walking away having to pay off $300K. The second reason is I wouldn't have been able to start Med School Insiders with anywhere near the same level of success. Because of firsthand experience with deliberate experimentation and achieving noteworthy results, our advice provided greater value, and we grew to 17K in a couple months, even with garbage production quality, and hit 100K in just 5 months, starting from scratch. Zero. No social media following, no email list, no website. And third, I wouldn't have been able to match into plastic surgery, which according to the official NRMP data is consistently one of the top 2 most competitive specialties. Now, if you're a competitive applicant, you don't have to do something that is competitive. Maybe you love family medicine or peds, but it gives you optionality, which is a great position to be in. If I didn't commit to pursuing excellence with such intensity, my life right now would look way different. Not necessarily worse, but way different. I'd probably be a gastroenterologist or maybe a general surgeon, and while there's nothing wrong with that, I'm so grateful for my current life path because this is way better for me, and it's only possible because I was willing to grind it out and explore my limits. Now, once you're in residency, again, understand that this is not nearly as uncommon as you probably think. I haven't found a central reporting of the number of residents who ultimately resign, but I remember being shocked by how common it was at the various programs I rotated at on my aways, as well as even my home institution. Quitting residency is more common in certain specialties, which is primarily a reflection of the lifestyle. That's why you see so many in general surgery leave. The lifestyle is brutal, and many decide it's just not worth it. General surgeons often quit to pursue one of 2 paths, but more on that shortly. What's surprising is that quitting residency even toward the end isn't terribly uncommon. The founders of Polarity TE were plastic surgery residents at Hopkins who quit in their 5th year out of a total of 6 to seize an incredible opportunity to revolutionize wound healing in the field of plastic surgery with a novel technology. Peter Attia, the widely popular longevity physician who does awesome work, quit in his 3rd year of general surgery residency out of 5 due to personal reasons, which he discusses on his episode with ZDogg MD. Although he also did 2 years of research fellowship at the NIH, so it's more like year 5 out of 7. Doing 1 or 2 years of research in general surgery residency isn't uncommon, but the clinical portion is 5 years. One of the co-founders of Levels, company I love and use every day, left ENT residency in her 4th out of 5 years. On the other hand, I also know many people who quit soon after starting residency. One of my former classmates who quit in just his 2nd month. He already had a successful business before residency and decided to focus exclusively on that instead. There is some mental math to perform depending on your duration and training. Obviously, there are a combination of factors here, such as how strong of a reason you have to leave, what timeline that decision needs to be made on, your mental and physical health, and so on. If you're in your last year of training, there's a much lower opportunity cost to completing 1 more year to finish your residency training versus quitting towards the beginning. But if you quit on day 1, there are also certain limitations to keep in mind. It's only after completing 1 year and completing your USMLE Step 3 exam, which is, by the way, by far the easiest of the 3 USMLE steps, that you're eligible to get your medical license. Depending on your ultimate career path, this may or may not be relevant to you. You can do urgent care, have more flexibility with performing research studies and clinical trials, or even start your own concierge practice like Peter Attia. So why did the Polarity TE guys quit at the end of residency and not finish 1 more year? I'm not sure. Perhaps it was the opportunity cost of not seizing what they felt was a highly promising technology and perhaps being beaten to the market by someone else. I'm not sure how the company is doing now. Some of my friends who are in the space said it wasn't achieving the results that they expected. And how do the founders feel about that? Again, I'm not sure, but these are the questions that are helpful to ask yourself. Life doesn't always go according to plan, and you need to think of the various outcomes and how you would feel in each of them to make the best informed decision. And step number 4, quitting to what? With rare exception, I strongly urge people not to quit unless they have a solid plan of what they're quitting to. Again, this is multifactorial. If you have no debt at all, the threshold shifts and it becomes easier to justify. Yet another reason to be a strong candidate to earn merit-based scholarship. You obviously aren't thinking of being a strong candidate to have less debt such that you can then quit in the future, but the point here is that you have the optionality, and there are so many benefits to being in a position of optionality that we don't always appreciate. Let's say if your mental or physical health is suffering, the threshold shifts yet again. If you have a solid plan to jump to, such as maybe you already have a job lined up, or a level of entrepreneurial success, then again, the threshold shifts. Many people think I quit plastic surgery residency because I hated it and then I started my business afterward. The truth is, I loved plastics, but I started 2 businesses before residency that were gaining traction before and during residency. And when I realized that building 2 businesses while doing a surgical residency wasn't sustainable, I had to make a difficult choice. But knowing I had some level of success with the businesses and a clear path towards monetization such that I could at least support myself, it made it much easier to make that leap. If I didn't have the businesses, I would have never quit. It wouldn't have been on my radar, and I would have been singularly committed to plastic surgery. With some napkin math, I predicted conservatively that I could make a certain dollar amount after a year or 2 that would allow me to easily pay off my $30,000 in student loans and still also live comfortably. Now, it's important to be conservative with this because it's better to make a decision based on an underestimate than on an overestimate. We quickly blew past that estimate and revenue and profits have risen since. And I'd much rather have that situation than the opposite of failing to meet targets. Now, going back to the actual decision-making process for me, I did a very thorough pros and cons list. I spoke with mentors and friends, and I even did the fear setting exercise that Tim Ferriss talks about in his TED Talk. I remember thinking back then that I had no time between residency and the 2 businesses. Even my days off, so you work generally 6 days, you have 1 day off. Even those days off were just playing catch up on the businesses, and time was this precious, elusive, limited resource. Now, to better grapple with this insanely challenging decision, still the most challenging decision of my life to this day, I did a mental exercise, and I concluded that even if I'm making only 100K, and I say only, I know it's good money, but it's ultimately a paltry sum when you're planning on becoming an attending plastic surgeon who averages over 500K. But if I made 100K and was working only 30 to 40 hours per week, that would likely align better with my values and allow me to prioritize what I feel should be prioritized. Things like health, fitness, exploration and experimentation through entrepreneurship, ultimately having a family and spending time with them, and so on. I needed to think of my values and priorities and not succumb to the sunk cost fallacy when making my decision. In my mind, this was the worst case scenario, which in hindsight, a little bit arrogant admittedly, right?
To say that, hey, the worst case, I'm gonna make 100K per year.
But at least it wasn't that I was gonna make 100K that first year. It was that after a few years, I would hopefully make 100K, or if my business has failed, because I have this entrepreneurial success prior, right? That I'd feel comfortable starting a new business and then get that to 100K per year. And for those who are curious, in my first year after quitting, I made $69,000. Nice.
Very nice.
I know someone who left residency, they had an idea for a business, but they didn't do any testing or validation prior to that. They quit residency, tried to build the business after the fact. 2 years later, the business did not succeed, so they reapplied to residency, couldn't get in, and they settled for being a professor at a community college, and ultimately, they wish they could go back and undo that decision. They regret it. Now let's go back to general surgery, since it's one of the specialties with a higher resident turnover. Lots of general surgery residents switch to another specialty within medicine, since they're primarily fed up with the notoriously terrible lifestyle of general surgery, but they aren't necessarily disillusioned with all of medicine. So common specialties would be anesthesia, as you're still in the OR, but in a much more relaxed capacity, and radiology. I've also seen some go into primary care specialties less commonly, since generally if you matched into general surgery, oftentimes you're not the type that enjoys long rounds or clinic. A large number of residents also go into consulting with one of the big 4, such as McKinsey or BCG. Now, Peter Attia actually worked for McKinsey as a consultant for a few years after quitting residency and before building up his concierge practice. Quitting without a plan is usually too high of risk. It's much more preferable to create your plan before you quit and have something lined up for when you pull the trigger. And again, everyone's situation is different. So if you're from the relatively large subset of medical trainees that come from privileged backgrounds, you may have more leeway, and again, the threshold shifts. But if you're in debt and you don't have much of a safety net, then you may not have that same luxury. But the silver lining here is that you have more of a push and urgency, a fire under your ass, which can push you to accomplish more than you would otherwise without. Again, going back to the additional opportunities and doors opened by applying yourself with intensity and pursuing excellence, if you were a strong student with tutoring or admissions committee experience or even passage writing, then companies like mine, which is Med School Insiders, might have some work for you. And finally, some words of caution. This is not a decision to rush or to take lightly. As I said earlier, this is likely an irreversible decision if you're in medical school or if you're in certain residencies. Emotions, they're gonna come and go. And don't be swayed by strong emotions that last for a few weeks or even for a few months. you are making a decision that changes the rest of your life. It breaks my heart when I see good people that work so hard walk away in a moment of weakness only to regret that decision later. But similarly, priorities change, and don't judge yourself if what you thought you wanted in your early 20s when you first started medical school is different than what you want a decade later. When you're much more of an adult, much more mature, you realize the importance of time and family and lifestyle. Everyone is gonna have different reasons for leaving, different priorities, thresholds, and risk tolerances. So I think I'm a little bit more risk tolerant than the average MD, but not to the point where I would have ever considered leaving medicine if I didn't have something solid to fall back on, and at least some experience under my belt to validate that I could make it as an entrepreneur. At the same time, I've known others who quit with far less certainty and far less rigor to their fallback plans, and yet they're still quite happy with the outcome. Your ultimate happiness is gonna be dictated far less by your circumstances and far more by your perspective and your outlook. We're all dealt different hands, and rather than whining about how life isn't fair, find the silver lining. Not because life isn't fair, it's definitely not fair, but because it will simply make you happier and more effective at whatever you want to do. Sure, the kid who quit medical school or residency that has a loaded family to serve as their safety net so they can figure out their next steps in comfort and with no real risk, they have a lot of things in life way easier than you do. But that doesn't mean that you have to be less happy than them. I know people who never have to worry about money because of family wealth that they themselves did nothing to earn or deserve. And from the outside, their life seems easy because they don't have to worry about a lot of the things that the rest of us do. But many of them have guilt, severe family relationship issues, or other difficulties that come to the surface when money problems are taken care of. All humans need to push against something. And by removing major obstacles and challenges from someone's life, they fill that void with small problems that they then expand to become big problems to them. I have one acquaintance who lacks resilience due to a storybook perfect upbringing and seems to be a passenger in this crazy thing called life. Always a victim to the slightest inconvenience, the negative Airbnb host review or possible statement that triggers their insecurity about their intelligence. They're trivial things to most of us, but people don't understand the trade-offs and they just say, must be nice to be a trust fund baby or whatever it is. And it's not that this person is fundamentally flawed or a bad person, they just lack the environmental stimuli to help them grow in certain ways. And the truth here is that there are far more upsides than downsides to a privileged background. But the point is that you can choose to find the story that serves you, not to delude yourself, but to empower yourself to see that mishaps, struggles, and obstacles are tools for your ultimate story and success. They're not anchors holding you back. The reason I even bring this up is a handful of the people I've spoken with, they feel trapped by debt, by sunk cost fallacy, by not having the financial flexibility that they would like. And I know it's challenging, but it's not as clear-cut good and bad as we sometimes make it out to be. Of course, every situation is different and it's difficult to create a systematic, stepwise process to walk through every single variation, but hopefully these 4 steps can get you started in the right direction. Check out the accompanying blog post with additional details on my new website, kevinjubalmd.com, and that's also where you can get in touch with me if needed. I wish you the best.